What is up, guys? Rick Cacus here. Thank you so much for joining me, and today we have the complete Crown of Sorrow Raid guide for dummies, showcasing every single mechanic of every single encounter, as well as a ton of tips, tricks, and strategies to help you guys complete this brand new raid. And so, let's get started. But a couple things just before we do. First off, as you can imagine, taking on this raid day one was a massive undertaking. In fact, when we beat it after a 14-hour run, our team was the first and so far only team in the world to have beaten this raid on the console. So if you find this video helpful, please remember to help me out by simply liking and especially sharing this video. It really does help. And if you're going to trust me to teach you the raid, you'll probably like some other guides I do, so be sure to subscribe. And the last thing I'm going to mention is that in the description down below, all the encounters are time-stamped, so you can come back to this video whenever and click the specific encounter you're stuck on. Okay, now let's begin here with the first raid encounter, with the objective being to dispel the Hive Ward. So, at the very beginning of this encounter area, right next to where you rally your raid rally banner, there's going to be a certain circle. Anyone who starts this encounter by standing in this circle is going to receive a certain buff. So, you actually only want 3 of your fire team members to stand in this circle and receive that buff. Now, this buff is called Witch's Blessing, and it has a timer. When you have this buff, some enemies are available to damage, like the 2 knights at the beginning of the encounter, and some enemies are glowing white and immune when you shoot them. If you don't have this buff, the opposite enemies are going to be immune when you shoot them. So the beginning knights, you can't damage. But the other enemies glowing white, for the people with the buff, you can damage. So that is the entire purpose of this buff and the overarching mechanic for this encounter. You have to split your team up. Half of the people are going to have this buff and have to deal with half of the enemies. The other half don't have the buff and are able to damage the other half of the enemies. So split your team up 2, 2, and 2. 2 teammates, one with the buff, one out, to the right side of this arena, 2 in the middle, again, one with and one without the buff, and then 2 on the left side. They are, again, just going to slay out on adds, whatever adds they can kill, and then, after a short while, there's going to be crystals that spawn. 3 of them, one on the left side of the arena, one in the middle, and one off to the right. These crystals, if you shoot them with a buff, nothing is going to happen, and if you shoot them without a buff, nothing is going to happen. If you don't kill all 3 of these crystals as soon as possible, your team will wipe. So what do? Well, you have to shoot them at the same time with one person who has a buff and one person who doesn't. Then the crystals will explode. Now the crystals will spawn in at around 15 seconds of your timer remaining for the first time, and then they can change a little bit as time goes on as you continue with this encounter. Now once the time reaches 0, you're eventually going to get the Witch's Curse mechanic and you are going to die. So what do? How do you keep these buffs going? Well, after you kill that first set of 3 crystals, you're going to head to the middle of the arena. Well, front middle technically, and here you're going to find a purple ball with a circle kind of around it. All of your teammates, all 6 of them, need to go within this circle around this ball, and then they all kind of shoot this ball at the same time. The ball seems to activate again when one person with and one person without shoot it. It is essentially going to invert the buffs. So, again, once you've killed the crystals, you have about 10 seconds remaining on your buff. Everyone hops in here, shoots that purple ball, and then the people with the buff are going to lose it, and the people that didn't have the buff are now going to gain that buff with a new timer. Everyone hops back up to their locations on the right, left, or middle, and then keeps killing adds. Now, there's a couple more things you need to be aware of. Sometimes ogres will spawn, one from the right and one from the left. You gotta kill these guys, they output a lot of damage. One of them will be able to be damaged by guys with buffs, and another will not. So essentially, when they spawn in, figure out if you can damage the ogre closest to your side. If you can't, just hop to the other side. So split your team up, 3 on the right, 3 on the left, kill those ogres as quickly as possible, and then just keep playing as normal. That is basically all there is for this encounter. It's keeping that buff going by inverting it every minute or so, killing as many adds as you can so you're not overwhelmed and killed. By the way, if you do die with this buff, you will lose it, so that's obviously very bad. You want 3 people with and 3 people without, or if there's only 2 people with the buff, the enemies that are required to be killed by people with the buff are going to just overwhelm you. But yeah, kill adds and stay on top of crystals, and then eventually, after just surviving for a certain amount of time, you will complete this encounter. Now, a couple of tips and tricks. You can do some stuff with the inversion ball to help out your team. For example, if someone does die with the buff, you actually don't necessarily want to put all 6 fireteam members in that inversion area. Why? Because the people who have it will lose it, and the people that don't have it will gain it, remember. So if someone has died, then there's only 2 people with the buff. Everyone goes in, those 2 people lose it, and 4 people gain it. Now you have too many people with the buff. So the person who died can actually stay outside of the inversion. The other 5 people go in, 2 people lose it, 3 people gain it. Now you're back to 3 with the buff, 3 without the buff. That is a super useful tip, and it's going to come up in several more encounters of this raid. Also, technically, if you do have the buff and you don't want it, you can go in there with just one other person without the buff and switch it. Like, you can switch your buffs pretty often, but be careful not to accidentally throw a grenade on this switching ball, because if you do, it could pop and then you could be screwed. Now, one more big tip for the entire raid. Since Crown of Sorrow technically takes place on Leviathan, the old Year 1 Leviathan armor and raid perks for that armor do seem to work. For example, there's one for class items where you can pick a certain element and you do 25% more damage of that chosen element. Obviously insanely good. Striking Hand does pop up when you melee an enemy, which gives you a massive chance to get heavy ammo from getting a melee kill. So those old Leviathan perks are going to be relevant, it seems like, in this raid. Alright, now moving on from there, we have everyone's favorite raid activity, a jumping puzzle. This one has a twist. You're going to have to do a lot of shooting during it. So, you're going to go to this area, and the first thing you're going to see is one of those crystals surrounded by a shield. Essentially, if you shoot it, it's just going to be immune. You can't penetrate that shield. But the crystals, the mechanics work identically to the encounter you just did. You need one person with the buff and one person without the buff to break these crystals. So, just like last time, 3 people gain the buff by standing at the circle at the very beginning. Then one person with and one person without the buff go inside the shield right next to the crystal. They both shoot it, it'll explode, and then a bunch of pillars will come up from the ground, and you start jumping on these and making your way forward. Now, in the air, like beyond these pillars, there's going to be more crystals. These ones do not have shields, and they simply need to be shot at by, again, one person with and one person without the buff. So take down all 3 of those crystals, and then more pillars are going to spawn, and another shielded crystal is going to spawn. So you're going to have to make your way forward. 2 people go in, they break that crystal, more crystals, like 3 more crystals spawn outside, you shoot them from afar, then you go back and kill one shielded crystal, and that's pretty much it. You rotate between shooting normal crystals without shields and then going into the shielded crystals. And by the way, you do want to make your way to certain areas because they are going to act as checkpoints. If you do die, you're just going to respawn at the checkpoint, get the buff again, and keep going. These checkpoints will also have the transfer orbs necessary to keep the buff active. It is a good idea to kind of split your team up to having people with and without the buff on the right, left, and middle side, and like obviously people on the left, you know, they look for the leftmost crystal in the air and they can try to always get that one, and then once you do blow up your crystal, make sure to look for any other lingering crystals and shoot them. Sometimes crystals will spawn like down below you or super high above you, and it can be a little tricky. Just know that there is always 3 you need to kill and then the one with the shield. But that's pretty much all you need to know. Make your way through this encounter. You're going to get another raid chest. Unfortunately, this one is not highlight gear, but then we have our next really big raid encounter. The next two encounters, this one and then the boss fight, are going to take place in the same kind of arena, so get used to it. And these next two encounters have a lot of mechanics. Strap yourselves in. So, when you start this encounter, the arena is split up into 3 different quadrants. There's actually going to be impenetrable walls separating these quadrants. So, if half your team is on one side, half your team is on the other side, you can't cross over. What you need to do is split your team into 2 people in each one of these quadrants. Then, start the encounter, the walls go up, again, you can't cross over, and one of these quadrants is going to have that circle that gives the Witch's Blessing buff. So, you begin this encounter when someone melees one of the 3 bosses. It's the double-axed shielded guy that's in the back of each quadrant. Actually, one is the real guy and the other 2 are duplicates, but that's beside the point. It actually really won't come up too much. Then, the walls are going to go up, like I've said, and one of these quadrants is going to have the Witch's Blessing circle that gives you that buff in it. The other 2 are not, but the other 2 are going to have that double-axed boss running around, and he will, like, basically instant melee kill you. So what you need to do is stay off the ground. Seriously, this is the key for this mechanic, staying off the ground. There's boxes, there's areas that you can jump up on, and the boss will just kind of run up to you and stare at you, but he can't actually attack you. There's also going to be a lot of thralls coming in later as well. So again, stay off the ground. This seems like something you guys are like, oh, of course I'm going to do. But trust me, a lot of your raid team members are going to die to this. Stay off the ground. In any event, the 2 teams without the buff go to town on the adds. Especially, there's going to be 2 wizards that spawn one after the other in the back of your quadrant. Once you kill those 2 wizards, then an ogre is going to spawn. Once you kill all the ogres in all 3 quadrants, then the next mechanic will activate. So if you don't kill your adds fast enough, you will fail this encounter. So rockets with cluster bombs, the loaded question, powerful weapons that can output a lot of damage to mages is extremely important. And often you're going to have only one person able to damage either the wizards or the ogre, so you really need to be on it. And don't be scared to use up your resources with rockets and so on. So, all 3 sections kill their ogres. What's next? Well, you're going to rotate clockwise and you're going to transfer the buff through the wall. So you're going to see in the middle of the walls, there's going to be another purple sphere. So the person with the buff is going to stand there, and the 2 people from the other quadrant are going to stand in that circle, shoot that purple ball, just like the previous encounters. It's going to transfer from the 1 guy to the 2 guys, and the wall's going to go down. So now you can travel in between those 2 previously inaccessible quadrants. And that means, overall, the 1 guy is going to lose the buff, 2 guys are going to gain it, so you're going to have 4 people in that area, 2 with the buff, 2 without the buff. Perfect. But you are going to need to rotate. So 1 person from the original side with the buff just stay there, and one of the new people with the buff has to rotate onto that guy's side, just so that, again, the guy with the buff can kill the enemies they can kill, and the opposite is true. If both guys have the buff and they're hanging out on one side, like, no one's going to be able to kill the wizards, for example, so that is a problem. And at this point, you just do the same thing again. Kill adds until all 3 ogres in all 3 of the different sections are dead, and then you're going to transfer the buff 1 more time. So that means everyone, all 6 people, meet up at the transfer zone. And again, it's easier to always go clockwise so you know where the transfer zone is going to be. So, all 6 people gather around the purple sphere, you shoot it, you rotate the buffs, and that means 2 people are not going to have the buff, and they give it to the other 4 people. 4 people now have the buff. What next? Well, you're not going to have any wizards or ogres spawn this time. Instead, this is the damage phase. So this whole time you've had that boss running around with the shields and double cleavers, being super annoying. Now you're finally going to get to damage him. How do you do that? Well, firstly, you need to take down his shield, and you do that by one person without the buff meleeing him or doing damage to him, and another person with the buff then coming in and meleeing him. That is going to break his shield. Then everyone can damage him, except you're going to notice the people with the buff still are hitting immunes. People without are going to be actually damaging him and taking down his shield. Like, the blast from his shield getting destroyed is going to take away the person who meleeed him with the buff's buff. And so that person who broke his shield can then get into damaging him. But this is super important. That also means that there's a little bit of a proximity zone when his shield goes down. So if all the people with the buff are close to him when his shield breaks, that means all those people are going to lose their buff, which is catastrophic for your damage output. So you actually have a lot of time to set up this damage phase. When you transfer that buff and 4 people have it, don't immediately go into DPS. Go to a safe area, maybe kill some adds that are pressuring you, and the boss is going to be kind of chasing you around, and then he's going to go into a wipe mechanic where he stands still, lifts up his arms, and starts glowing. And after a while, he's going to kind of explode and wipe all your fire team. But again, this actually happens over a pretty long period of time. So once he starts to do the wipe mechanic and he's standing still, that is when you set up for a damage phase. Go to a nearby box, not too close because again, you don't want to get into that proximity of a shield explosion, but far enough that you can light him up with, outbreak primes or whatever. Then one person that does not have the buff designates themselves as the guy, the big daddy, whatever you want to call him. He is always going to be the guy that doesn't have the buff that primes this boss, and then someone else with the buff again detonates that shield. You guys do a damage phase, as you can see in the background gameplay, and then his shield's going to go back up. So what do? Well, the guy without the buff again primes him, and someone else with the buff comes, hits him, and takes down his shield again. This is why you have all 4 people with the buff. Technically, you break his shield, do damage, someone else with the buff comes, breaks his shield, do another damage phase, then someone else comes, breaks his shield, do a damage phase, one more person, the 4th guy is going to come, break his shield, and do a damage phase. Doing all 4 is going to let you have significantly more damage, and in fact, you are able to 2-phase or technically even 1-phase this boss. Now, some big tips: when you are breaking his shield, he is still very much often going to be meleeing you. So be careful, like hover above him until you're absolutely ready. And it is a good idea to have the guy that doesn't have the buff, who is like the designated primer kind of, to be using Melting Point for their Titan and a Halo-Fired Heart to get their Melting Point back extremely fast, so that when they prime they can kind of also Melting Point, and then his shield goes down and then you can do a lot more damage than normal. Now, once you do hopefully break his shield 4 times and inflict a significant amount of damage, then he's going to kind of disappear, and 3 of him are going to go back to the back of the 3 different quadrants, and then you have a little bit of time to go around the arena. The walls are not up yet, so you can grab ammo, grab orbs, all of that stuff, but you do have to make it back to your quadrants where you first started. Someone melees him, the walls go back up, and if you haven't killed him in that first damage phase, you do the exact same things you've already done, and then hopefully you can kill him again, or even in a 3rd damage phase after that. Now, some big tips for this section. Firstly, Warlocks with Well of Radiance are great. You're going to need multiple for the damage phase because it's long enough that one well won't last the entire time. They're even better in the next section, and they're great for survivability as well. They're also not bad when paired with a couple of hunters with Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun. They can one-shot kill the ogres, and the ogres are going to kind of be your biggest problem, again, especially when only 1 person per quadrant can take an ogre down. So just 1 Celestial, kill that guy, produce orbs. The Well of Radiance Warlock grabs those orbs, like basically after a while it gets a super back pretty quickly. That's actually a pretty good combo. Another very important tip is that likely the main trouble you're going to encounter is killing those wizards, killing those ogres fast enough. Again, the Witch's Blessing has a timer, so if you don't switch, if you don't transfer within that short time frame, you are going to die. Like, you are not going to be able to complete this encounter. So kill those guys extremely fast. That's why it's a good idea to use your heavy and your special on these guys. And then if you do have the outbreak perfected, you can use that to damage the boss. So your primary is for boss damage, and then your heavy and your special is for killing the adds. It's much more efficient that way. But one more quick tip, like I mentioned, there is a timer, but you can delay it a little bit. When the encounter starts, you don't need to pick up the Witch's Blessing right away. The guy can actually wait, help his side with the two wizards, and then pick it up and have it ready to kill the ogre that's only available to kill with that blessing. That'll also give you a little bit more time to transfer it to the other side. But that's really all there is to it. So let's move on to the final encounter of the Crown of Sorrow raid, the big boss fight. Now here, you're going to be in the same arena, however, the walls that were up before, they're not going to be up. The transfer orbs are still going to be in the same locations and you're still going to use them, but again, you can travel freely around this arena. And the first thing you're probably going to notice is a massive boss that has now spawned. Shooting him in the face will start this encounter. Then, as pretty much always, a circle is going to spawn. Anyone who stands in that circle is going to get the Witch's Blessing buff. Just like the previous encounters, you want 3 people to get this buff and 3 people to avoid the circle so that they do not have this buff. What do you do here? Well, you are going to be pounded from all sides. Seriously, there's going to be that original big boss and 2 more spawning on the other 2 quadrants, and then they're just going to go to town with fireballs. You need, again, as many warlocks as possible to chain Well of Radiance over and over and over again if you are being pressured. If you're extremely high light, you can maybe get away with some healing rifts and so on, but chaining Well of Radiance is definitely a great approach. So again, more warlocks the better, but also warlocks with the Phoenix Protocol, exotic chess piece, even though it was somewhat nerfed, it's still going to significantly help you get your super back faster. So, you start this encounter, 3 people grab the buff, you put a Well of Radiance somewhere in the middle. It actually doesn't matter which of the 3 sides you put it on, wherever you feel most comfortable, then immediately start ad clearing. The guys without the buff are going to have to shoot the acolytes. They're not that powerful, but if you ignore them, they can definitely overwhelm you and deal enough damage to kill you inside the well even. And the people with the buff focus on knights, killing knights that have now spawned. Then crystals are going to spawn. So you're going to need to designate a 2-man like strike force team that every time crystals spawn, and there is a sound cue for them, but you also want to be looking for them, they go off, one with the buff, one without the buff, and kill that crystal. Now again, this doesn't actually have to change because you can designate who gets the buff, so just one person of that strike force gets the buff off the beginning, one person, doesn't, and then those 2 people, every time a crystal spawns, they go, jump inside, there's going to be the shield around it, just like the jumping puzzle, they jump inside, damage it, break it, and then get back to the well with the rest of the team. Crystals are going to spawn once every 30-ish seconds, and again, ignoring them will wipe your entire team, so the strike force needs to be busy and going to get the crystals every time they do spawn. The rest of your team, so far, does need to focus on adds, and then you actually do need another designated strike force of another 2 different people, one with the buff, one without the buff, to kill the boss. We'll talk about that in just a sec. Now again, there's no more walls to take down, but you still need to hit up those transfer stations to keep the buff alive. So, after the strike team kills that first crystal, it's a good time to everyone, as you can see, go over to one of the transfer balls. Everyone, once they're in the area, shoots it, it transfers to the other 3 people, and you all go back. Now, you actually don't need to transfer after the first crystal break. You can transfer after 2 if your team wants. You just need to transfer, obviously, before the time reaches 0. But what we found is, first crystal break, transfer, then go back, kill adds, 2 crystal breaks, then transfer again. Now, once 3 crystals have been destroyed, new enemies are going to spawn in the form of cursed thralls. Yellow bar, cursed thralls. So run and transfer and then kill these cursed thralls as quickly as possible. They are going to wipe your team. They're going to cause so many failed runs. It's not even funny. These guys are serious. So you're going to use likely an Outbreak Perfected to kill the boss. So using something like a heavy machine gun or, again, the loaded question, something like that to kill these guys as quickly as possible is very, very important. So after that 3rd crystal break and that 2nd transfer, potentially, you're going to have those guys to deal with. But also, ogres are going to spawn. 2 ogres are going to spawn in 2 of the different quadrants. So the people that don't have the buff, they can't damage the cursed thralls. They need to look around as quickly as possible and kill those 2 ogres extremely quickly because they can also cause a ton of damage. Now, once the thralls are dead, and hopefully the ogres too, you have to deal with the boss. So, that second 2-man strike force is going to look where the boss is, the same boss from the last encounter, so the guy with dual cleavers running around with the shield, and then they need to go and take down his shield when he is in between the 2 pillars, as you can kind of see in the background gameplay, when he is up on this platform. Then, once you take down his shield, he's just going to cower there. He's going to stand still. Then you make your way back to the well, and one or both of these strike team members turn around and look at the massive boss in the background. That guy is going to start to get a glowing green hand. Shoot that glowing green hand, and then, as you can see, he's going to smack down on the ground with his giant sword, and he's going to kill that boss you stunned. That's what you need to do. You need to do that on all 3 of these different areas. Go and stun the boss, shoot the green hand, cause him to smack the ground, and kill that boss. Once that's been done 3 times, then you're going to go into the actual damage phase. All the while, you need to be transferring before you die, and your other strike team needs to be dealing with those crystals whenever they spawn, and the other 2 guys in the well need to be killing as many adds as they possibly can. It is extremely hectic, there's a lot going on, and timing is everything. But there are cyclical rotations. So again, kill that first crystal, transfer, go to the well, then kill 2 more crystals, transfer again, get back to the well and kill the cursed thralls and ogres as quickly as possible, then go and deal with the boss, make him smash. After that, like crystals, transfer, then thralls, ogres, transfer, boss again, and it's going to go in that rotation like every time. Once you get kind of that first rotation down, you hit his hand and he smacks that first boss, you kind of did what you did to get to that point just 2 more times. But again, because it's extremely hectic, people are likely to die. So that tip I said before of leaving someone out and transferring 2 to 3 people is often going to come up. So make sure you use that. Make sure that your strike teams have 1 person with the buff and 1 person without the buff. If someone dies that's on the crystal breaking strike force, for example, they need to call that out immediately and say, I need a guy with a buff. I need a guy with a buff right now, because if they don't get someone to volunteer and go and shoot that darn crystal, your team is gonna wipe. Same with the other strike team that's killing the boss. If someone ends up dying, which it's very likely to do, that boss is so annoying, you are gonna need to have someone else volunteer and run up there, and 1 person with, 1 person without the buff to take his shield down. So there is gonna be some switching around. Deaths are not the end of the world because of that transfer tip I told you guys, but you need to really be aware of who has the buffs and who hasn't. Now, as I alluded to, the boss is kind of a nightmare. He runs around the entire map. He can even push so far forward, he's up in your Well of Radiance. So something to do is to have 1 Titan with a bubble and the Helm of Sate 14. So when the boss goes inside, you have Armor of Light, you're not gonna die, and also he's gonna get blinded and you can very quickly get a double smack, take down his shield, he stands still, go back to the well. That's what you're gonna see in the background gameplay. Now, you don't actually technically have to do this. 2 people can just go in and smack him. But if you're finding the boss strike team is dying quite a bit, a Titan bubble is the way to go. Alright, now that is everything leading up to the damage phase. Now, what do you do for the actual damage phase? Well, once the boss has again smashed all 3 of the miniature version of the boss, then the 3 different giant bosses are going to hold up their hands all glowing. Essentially, you need to kill the 2 decoys and find out which is the real boss. So, all 6 of your fire team members is assigned one of the hands. From the last encounter, if you had a certain quadrant, just have that quadrant again, and just one person say, I'm the right hand, another person says, I'm the left hand. So when he lifts all his hands, everyone shoots one of those hands until it's down on the ground, and then his face is going to be able to be damaged. You shoot his face until the decoys will recoil back and disappear, and then there's only going to be 1 remaining. If you don't achieve this for whatever reason, you're going to have a much shorter damage phase and potentially wipe your team. So take down his 6 hands, shoot him in the face until he's immune or it disappears. Then it's going to reveal the guy you actually need to damage. At this point, super importantly, quickly run and transfer, because you want a fresh buff for the entire damage phase. You don't want to have to run and transfer your buff because you're in the middle of the damage phase and you're like, oh crap, there's only 10 seconds remaining. Everyone, we gotta leave the damage phase and go and transfer. So make sure you transfer like just before you get into the damage phase. And the timing for that is that there's going to be 1 crystal spawn after you've, destroyed all the decoys. The strike team goes and kills that crystal. Everyone else goes and basically transfers. The strike team can go and transfer at another location, or you can wait for all 6 people, and then you start your damage phase. The 1 real boss is going to lift his 2 hands. Yet again, you shoot the green hands, lower them down, then his face is able to be damaged, and then you can start actually inflicting damage on the boss. You'll see his health bar finally go down. The mountaintop, I've heard, is fantastic here, but the Outbreak Prime is, as always, an all-star. It just inflicts so much damage. Even with the level cap bonus that's in the first 24 hours, we were able to just 2-phase this guy. So yeah, Outbreak is fantastic. Remember, if you are using the Outbreak, to pre-fire. So after you're shooting his face, he's going to become immune again, and he's going to raise his hands again. You can shoot his hands before they start glowing. So as soon as they start glowing, you're going to get them down, and then you can start shooting his face again really quickly. You're in for another, damage phase. Then he raises his hands again, shoot his hands again, go back to the face. So you're going to go from hands to face to hands to face several times, as you can see in the background gameplay during this encounter. Again, constantly be firing. Keep that Outbreak bonus up, or whatever weapon you're actually using. And be sure to pre-fire those hands so they go down super, super quickly and you can get back to damaging. Now, while you're damaging this boss, there are going to be ads. There are going to be just normal thrall that push you. So half the people of your team are going to have that bonus. They're the only people with Witch's Blessing that are going to be able to take down these thrall. So you should be able to tank them when you're in the well, but they can throw off your shot. They can cause you to start missing. If they all focus on one guy, they can technically kill them. So just someone with the buff, when you're being absolutely harassed by those thralls, just throw a grenade, take them out. But if there's a warlock with that buff, be sure to melee them for an empowered melee and 20% more damage for your entire team. That's a very useful tip as well. In any event, once you're done this damage phase and the boss kind of disappears, transfer again right away, because you're probably nearing the very end of your buff, and then get doing back to what you were doing. Literally do the same stuff in terms of crystal killing, boss smacking, and then just staying alive, killing ads, and so on until you get to another damage phase. If you even need it, you can technically 1-phase this guy. And once you do damage this guy enough, he's just going to die. There is no, final stand mechanic. You are going to complete the Crown of Sorrow raid and collect your loot. Guys, that is it for the complete Crown of Sorrows raid guide. I really hope you enjoyed this video, found it informative, found it helpful. If you did, again, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Destiny 2 content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. And if you guys want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That's linked in the description down below. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.